Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. Today, we're going to talk a little bit of recruiting. It's going to just be me today. Vince is a little bit under the weather, but we're going to talk recruiting today. Notre Dame has an absolutely huge recruiting weekend coming up. And it's to me, this group coming on campus this weekend, it's not the biggest. It's actually going to be the smallest pure number that we have. There's 9 kids coming. I mean, I'm going to combine 2 different parts of visits in this conversation. There's the weekend visitors, which arrive Friday and leave Sunday. Then there are the Monday, Tuesday visitors. These visits are 48 hours. So essentially, if you arrive Friday morning, you leave Sunday morning, essentially. So it's 48 consecutive hours. So they're going to have 9 kids on campus. This is 2022 kids on campus this weekend for official visits. Then they will have 3 people on campus Monday to Wednesday. So I'm going to put these together. It's not the biggest weekend. The other 2 weekends are certainly bigger from a number standpoint. But this weekend, to me, this weekend plus the Monday, Tuesday visitors is going to ultimately determine whether this class is going to be a top 7 to 10 class like we saw in 2021, which is on the high end of what we've seen under Brian Kelly, or if this class has a true chance to be an elite class. So that's what we're going to break down today. That's what we're going to dive into and really talk about it, because they have to have a huge weekend. They have to have tremendous success this weekend and into early next week if this class is going to pan out and be what it is. So as I said, there are 12 visitors on campus this week, going to be this next 5-day period, including 2 commits. And I would argue you could make a case that each one of these kids fits into one of the 2 gap closer categories that we talk about, which is, kind of why I'm rocking the gap closer shirt today. Each one of these kids, to me, has a chance to fit into that category. Now, some are sort of in that group where they are on the level of those other programs. They are Alabama kids. They are Clemson kids. They're Ohio State kids. Some of them are kids that close the gap. They don't necessarily erase the gap. So, I mean, you have to have a big weekend. Notre Dame has to knock it out of the park this weekend. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over each kid, kind of talk about where things stand with each recruit, going into the visit, talk about what is needed from Notre Dame during the visit, and then we're going to dive into just sort of some predictions. So I'm not going to try not to give anything away, but we're going to talk about where I think things stand, and if things go well, this is what I think is going to happen. So that is going to be today's show. Just sending Vince a quick note. So, like I said, Vince is a little under the weather, so that's why he is not going to be on the show today, but he should be back. Hopefully be back tomorrow for the live podcast. So let's dive right into it. So to begin, we are going to look at the players that are going to be on campus this weekend. Like I said, a lot of these names are going to be very familiar to all of you. So look, we've gone over a lot of these kids in detail. And then, like I said, this is why this is such a huge weekend. And this goes position by position. You start with Dallin Hayden at running back. You go to Tobias Merriweather at wide receiver. That right there is my number 1 ranked wide receiver and my number 1 ranked running back in this class. Offensive line, Jake Taylor. Billy Shrouth was originally going to come next weekend, but he is now going to come this weekend. You've got arguably the top interior prospect on the board, and then, in my opinion, the best tackle on the board. You have Anthony Lucas at defensive tackle, who you've heard me say on this podcast many, many times, he is the most important recruit in this class for Notre Dame. You've got linebacker junior Tuialamaka coming in this weekend. You've got Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore. We've talked a lot about what would be the ideal corner class in this class. They've already got Jaden Mickey. Those 2 guys would be next on the list as far as guys that are really important for Notre Dame. Then you get into Jake Pope, who a lot of people like at safety. I like him as safety, and he's a very good player. He'd be the one guy I would kind of debate on how much of a gap closer is he, but he's still a good player that improves the safety depth chart, which is why I think you throw him under the gap closer category. And then, of course, on Monday, Jalen Sneed arrives with a pair of Notre Dame defensive commits. And I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that they're bringing him on campus when you've got a couple commits on campus. And Jalen Sneed, as we've talked about, is arguably the top linebacker on the board, depending on if you're just looking overall or if you're looking at a certain position. But he is arguably the top linebacker left on the board for Notre Dame, along with Junior Tuialamaka. So it is a huge weekend for Notre Dame. And there are several kids in this group that I believe Notre Dame is in the either leads for or is in the top 2 for going into this weekend, which only adds to the importance of this weekend. You look at Dallin Hayden, Tobias Merriweather, Billy Shrouth, Anthony Lucas, Junior Tuialamaka, Benjamin Morrison, and Jalen Sneed. I would argue Notre Dame is in the top either leads for or is number 2 for each of those kids. And so we're going to dive into each of them and talk about just kind of where things stand and what Notre Dame needs to do this weekend. So that's what we're going to do. So let's begin on offense. We're going to begin with, we're just going to go right down this list, and that is Dallin Hayden, who is a running back from Tennessee. As I've said, he graded out on the Irish Breakdown board as a 4-star recruit, top 100 player. He's ranked in the top 250 by everybody else. I think he's a little underrated. He went to Illinois this past weekend. He's at Notre Dame this weekend. He's at Ohio State next weekend. His recruitment is sort of tracked this way. Ohio State was his early leader, and I think Ohio State still holds the advantage. He made a summer visit to Notre Dame and just loved the campus. Notre Dame staff started pushing a little harder for him after not pushing as hard early on, and that's allowed them to close the gap. Now, have they been able to completely erase it? Have they been able to overcome Ohio State? No. The only chance for that to happen is going to be this weekend. They're going to have to knock it out of the park. This is one of those kids that I believe it's essentially going to be a Notre Dame Ohio State battle. He's talked about Illinois. There's been other programs mentioned, but he's only scheduled visits to Illinois where his brother plays, Notre Dame. He's talked about Tennessee, but I don't see them being a factor. There's other programs he's mentioned. I believe Oregon's a program he's mentioned in the past, but it's going to be Notre Dame, Ohio State, or Illinois. That's essentially what it boils down to. And at this point in time, I really feel like it's a situation where it's Notre Dame or Ohio State. I believe Ohio State has a slight lead based on he has better relationships with the Ohio State staff. Tony Alford and Ryan Day have done a phenomenal job recruiting Dallin Hayden. For Notre Dame, they've kind of been playing catch-up for a little bit and trying to get back in with him. So I think at this point in time, Notre Dame has narrowed the gap as much as they can without a visit. And I think that having the visit before Ohio State is huge because you all know how Ohio State is. If he gets on campus before he gets to Notre Dame, they're going to try to talk him into committing and try to talk him into not making the Notre Dame trip. So it's important that he makes this trip for Notre Dame this weekend. It's important that they knock it out of the park. If Notre Dame's going to have any chance with Dallin Hayden, this weekend is going to be huge. And it sets up a string of 3 straight weekends where Notre Dame is bringing a running back on campus. They have a running back on campus this weekend in Dallin Hayden. Nicholas Singleton comes on campus next weekend, and then Gavin Sawchuk comes on campus the weekend after that. So they're going to have to hit a grand slam with one of these 3 backs. Obviously, in my opinion, the visits are being set up as what I believe are the top 3 backs. And that's I don't believe that's how Notre Dame scheduled it. This is just how it worked out based on my ranking. And that is the best running back on the board is Dallin Hayden. He is this weekend the highest upside running back who may be the best down the road, but number 2 on my board for right now. Nicholas Singleton is next weekend, and then Gavin Sawchuk is the weekend of the 25th. So that's where things are with Dallin Hayden. Going to have a big visit if you're Notre Dame. Next is Tobias Merriweather, number 1 receiver on my board. Tobias is from the state of Washington. He's talked about Oregon is very involved with him. Washington's tried to make a hard push for him as the in-state school, UCLA, USC, and then Stanford. Notre Dame and Stanford have been mentioned as the leaders at other times. Oregon has been considered a major player at other times. I think, honestly, at this point in time, Notre Dame is Tobias Merriweather's leader. He has been on campus before. He was on campus for, I believe it was the Navy game in 2019, but I may be confusing him with somebody else. But he was on campus during the 2019 season. So he's been on campus before on his own dime, but those in-season visits when you're, I think at the time, he'd been a rising sophomore. He would have been a sophomore in high school, right, at the time. They're a little different. You're not getting as much individual attention. You're not getting as much, you're not being treated like he's going to be treated this weekend, essentially. And so he's going to be on campus this weekend. Here's the interesting thing for Notre Dame. I believe they're his leader. I hope that they're going to be able to knock it out of the park this weekend. But here's what the battle is for Notre Dame. The battle is it's hard. It's easier to hold on to being the leader for a kid for a month or two than it is going to be for 6 or 7 or 8 months. And Tobias has said that his plan is to commit in January and then sign in February. Now, sometimes those kids will actually sign in December if they've made their decision, but not announce it. But the point is that he doesn't plan on committing this summer. I don't think that Notre Dame is going to be able to push and convince him to do so directly. I think the key for Notre Dame is going to be, look, we can't afford to not be successful recruiting receivers. That's why we've offered Alec. That's why we've offered Nicholas Anderson. We can't afford, especially with all the transfers we've had, we can't afford, I don't think they'd necessarily say it like that, we can't afford to miss out at receiver. And yes, you're our guy. We love you. You're our number one receiver. But where do we stand? And I think that's the push that if you're Notre Dame, you have to make with him is even if you can't get him to commit, you have to at least be able to try to get an idea of where you stand with him. The perfect scenario, the knocked it out of the park, grand slam home run scenario for Notre Dame is that they can convince him to make a summer decision. I think that if they can convince Tobias to make a summer decision, I think that sends just shockwaves to the rest of the entire offensive class, even if it's maybe not a public commitment. Hopefully it's a public commitment because a public commitment then allows you to have Tobias be part of recruiting other players to your class because he's an incredible talent. But even if it's a private commitment, I think that allows you as a coaching staff to really adjust how you're recruiting your board at this point in time. I think it allows you to be more picky. I think it allows you to kind of shoot for some of the top other players to go with Tobias. That's going to be a big, important thing. So he's only got one other visit scheduled for the summer. That's going to be Stanford at the end of the month. I don't know if he's got any other official visits. At least I don't have any reported. I haven't heard from him about any other official visits this weekend. So I think that speaks volumes to two things. Number one, Notre Dame is his leader. And number two, that he's not necessarily in a rush to make a commitment. I think those are what those two things say. And so Notre Dame is going to have to absolutely crush it this weekend. Going to go in a little reverse order here from the list right there. I'm going to talk about Billy Shrouth first. And the reason I'm going to do that is I'm going to talk about him because he is the guy to me that if of all the players on this list, besides the two committed players, the one I'm probably most confident in right now ending up in this class. Visited Wisconsin last weekend, went really well. He's going to visit Ohio State next week is the plan as of right now, but he moved his Notre Dame visit up to this weekend. Was going to visit next weekend, but he moved it up. Notre Dame has been his leader for a very, very long time. That's not a surprise to anybody. I think Jeff Quinn has built a very strong relationship here. They've made him feel very much a wanted and desired player in this class. So I think he's a guy that I look at and say that's one that I feel is very, very good for Notre Dame. I feel like getting him on campus the same weekend as Jake Taylor is going to be important because Jake Taylor, to me, is the biggest offensive line recruit left on the board. And I know the rankings don't say that, but as y'all know, I don't care about rankings. I care about what the film shows me. And the fact that he's down to Oklahoma, Notre Dame, and Alabama, the three best offensive line programs in the country right now, should also tell you a little something, okay? Because they're all pushing hard for him. He went to Alabama this first weekend. He's coming to Notre Dame this weekend. He's going to Oklahoma the next weekend. Oklahoma's his leader. I mean, right now, Notre Dame trails those programs. I've said before, and I'm going to reiterate it now, this visit is going to be so incredibly important for Jake Taylor and for Notre Dame. This is your shot if you're Notre Dame. This is your shot to knock it out of the park and do one of two things. This is your goal if you're Notre Dame this weekend. Goal number one is obvious. Convince them that this is the place for them, right? The tradition, meet the players, have them get a chance to see the Joe Moore Award, which is not going to help too much because I believe Oklahoma and Alabama both also have one at their schools. So it's going to be about showing him the tradition and where he fits in and the scheme and all those kind of things, having him connect with the players and just being able to have every single coach possible to be involved with this kid because you have to come out of this weekend feeling really good about where you stand with him. Because if not, he's going to go to Oklahoma next weekend, and ultimately that's where he's going to end up. So the second part of the goal is just what I said, is you have to at least make it so difficult for him to decide that he decides to wait a little bit. That's going to be the key. The longer this goes out, this goes on, it's one of those things that could end up being better for Notre Dame unless they just completely knock it out of the park this weekend. Jake Taylor's probably the player on this list I'm least confident in Notre Dame landing, but he's very important. He is an elite tackle, in my opinion. And I've said this before. If it came down to me, and I'm sure some of you are going to disagree with me on this, and that's okay. But based on film and fit into the system and the fact that I think he's a pure tackle, if you told me you can have Jake Taylor, Zach Rice, you get to pick one. Which one do you want? I'm taking Jake Taylor. I just am, and I'm not even feeling bad about it. I'm not second guessing myself on it. That's who I'm taking. I just think he's that kind of player. I think he's special. Next up is Anthony Lucas. And look, I see my guy Jeff Fluke says, I'm guessing the first recruit they talk about is Anthony Lucas. Coach gets the feels when his film is on. Yes, Jeff, I do get the feels when I see Anthony Lucas's film. And because I think I've said this before, I think Anthony Lucas is an elite player. I think Anthony Lucas is the kind of prospect that you just doesn't come to Notre Dame very often, in that, yes, he has a high ceiling and he's got the tools and the intangibles and the things that Notre Dame looks for in their defensive linemen, and it's worked out great. They love length, they love athleticism. But he's one of those guys that to me is a little further along than a lot of the guys that Notre Dame gets. He's 6'4", he's listed between 6'4", 6'5", he's between 275 and 285, depending on which recruiting service you look at. He's got great length, great athleticism. This is a kid that to me is just scratching the surface of how good he can be, but he's still a guy that shows that he could come in and play early on. I think he's a great, great fit for the Notre Dame defense. And I think that's a very important thing because, if Notre Dame was running its previous defense, he'd still been a really good fit, but he would have been a three technique. I mean, that's the position he would have been fit. If there was any versatility, he would have been a three technique or a nose tackle. I think those are the two positions you could look at him as. In this defense, and Marcus Freeman's defense, I could see him playing three different positions in this defense. I think he could play the nose because he is a bigger, more athletic guy. I think this defense wants the nose to be more disruptive. It's not your typical nose tackle. It's almost like, hey, look, we're going to dominate the A-gaps, and we're going to need you to dominate the A-gaps with your quickness, with your power, those type of things. I think he fits the three technique even better than the nose because I think he's a legitimate run stopper. He's a legitimate pass rusher with his length and with his athleticism. He has phenomenal hands. His ability to use his hands to be a difference maker at the point of attack is really impressive. Long arms, big hands, strong hands, and fast hands. Those are things that as a defensive line coach you dream about getting in a player. And if you can get that in a player that's already 280, 285, you're going to be loving life at that point in time. But I also think Anthony Lucas, and we've seen it on his high school film, so this isn't just necessarily me thinking based on athleticism that he can do it. We've seen him do it. He's lined up on the edge as a five technique, or sometimes even in high school, a wider technique. I don't think he's like a 7 or 9 technique at Notre Dame. But as much three down as Notre Dame is going to want to play, he's a guy that you can put on the edge. Honestly, if you had to say, kind of compare him, he's a bigger version of Jason Adamiola. And I think you all know my stance on Jason Adamiola and what I think of Jason Adamiola and what Vince thinks of Jason Adamiola. We think he is a difference maker. Anthony Lucas is a taller, longer, thicker version of Jason Adamiola. And a guy that can play on the edge, can rush and not just be on the edge as a run stopper, but a guy that can rush the quarterback against a tackle. I think he has that kind of ability. He is a dynamic player. It's Texas A&M is where he visited last weekend. He's visiting Notre Dame this weekend. He's talked about visiting Oregon and Miami. Alabama's been trying to be on him. Texas is trying to be on him. From everyone that I've talked to, this is a Notre Dame, Texas A&M battle. I felt good about where Notre Dame has been for a long time. I think getting the visit after Texas A&M is an important one. Texas A&M is going to show them all the pomp and circumstance and all the fun stuff, roll out the red carpet. And we all know Mike Elko is a great recruiter. I mean, we saw it in his short time at Notre Dame. The list of impact players that Mike Elko is the driving force for is long, and he wasn't here very long. It includes Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, Myron Tongavaloa, Kyle Hamilton, Houston Griffith. There's going to be a lot of guys starting on the Notre Dame defense this year that were recruited by Mike Elko. Shane Simon was recruited by Mike Elko. So he certainly left his blueprint on this program, and he's done a great job of collecting talent at Texas A&M. So we know he can recruit at a high level. Now it's time for Mike Elston and Marcus Freeman to kind of take it where they're going to knock it out of the park. I feel like Notre Dame is in a good place for a number of reasons. Number one, long-time relationship. Mike Elston started this relationship a while ago. Did a really good job of building up a connection with Anthony Lucas. Marcus Freeman, as soon as he was hired, this is one of the first recruits he got involved with. And so you've had arguably Notre Dame's two best recruiters on this kid for months. I think they've built a strong relationship. I've talked to multiple sources who have said Anthony comes from a family that is very, very interested in the academic aspects of what Notre Dame has to offer. What is helping Notre Dame now with him is the fact that in recent seasons, not only does Notre Dame offer the great academics and the tradition and all that kind of stuff, but think about how many defensive linemen they've put in the NFL in recent years. How often is it that Notre Dame can go toe-to-toe with the top SEC school and say, yeah, they're doing a great job, but our current staff has put more defensive players in the NFL than defensive linemen in the NFL than their current defensive staff. And that is a fact. And, you look at Notre Dame's, we've said this before, Notre Dame's 2018 defensive line had five defensive linemen from that group get drafted. And a couple others are still there. I mean, Myron Tungavaloa is still at Notre Dame. He's going to get drafted next year. So it's going to end up being 8, maybe 9, depending on if Kurt Hinish is able to get drafted. 8 or 9 guys. And, actually, it could get up to 10 because Jason Ademilola was a rotation player on that team in the Clemson game. He's a guy that I think is going to get drafted next year as well. So you now have the football field and the draft as key factors for you, and that's ultimately a thing that could have a huge impact on a kid like Anthony Lucas, who does value academics, but also is a top recruit that wants to go somewhere where he's going to be able to play for a championship and have a chance to be developed into an NFL player. And Notre Dame on the defensive line can offer all of those as well as just about any team in the country. So that's big, and this weekend's going to be big. There's going to be important players on campus. It's a small enough weekend to where I really feel like each of these kids is going to get a lot of attention. And Notre Dame needs to make sure that Anthony Lucas gets a lot of attention this weekend, and his family gets a lot of attention, and that they understand that this weekend could be the deal breaker for Anthony Lucas. If you knock it out of the park this weekend, I'm going to feel really good about their chances of landing him. If things don't go great this weekend and you leave that door for Texas A&M or maybe even for Oregon and Miami to get back in the mix, and this thing drags out for a while, it'll concern me. And this is one of those ones where, like with Jake Taylor, I said the longer it drags out, the more concerned or the better it is for Notre Dame. This one is one of those where the longer it drags out, the more concerned I get. And that's where things stand with Anthony Lucas. Next is Junior Tuihalamaka. Now, Junior is essentially down to, well, he's not down to, but he's got 2 visits scheduled, one for Texas, which he made last weekend, and one for Notre Dame this weekend. That's essentially where this is going to be. As I've said for last couple months, Texas has made a great charge with Junior. They've done a phenomenal job recruiting him. At the end of the day, however, I think that as long as things go well this weekend, that's the key. And this is why I've said for so long. These visits are so much more important than they've been in the past because a lot of these kids have not been on campus yet. A lot of these kids have not met these coaches in person yet. And so I think this is a very, very important weekend for them with Junior. I think this is the weekend that you seal the deal with Junior Tuihalamaka. We've talked a lot about him in the past. We don't need to rehash a lot of those things. He is a pure Mike linebacker. He is a tackle-to-tackle thumper. He is the guy that you're putting in there to shut down the run. I think he's improved in pass coverage here in recent seasons. That's an area where there's continued improvement is needed. But he's a guy to me that a good weekend is going to seal the deal for him. And as good as I think, as much of a charge as I think Texas has made, and look, Texas didn't just knock it out of the park this weekend. Texas has been doing a good job really for the last month or two. And we've talked about that several times in Irish Breakdown. They've been doing a really good job of closing the gap and building this thing up. So that this weekend just has to kind of stall all that momentum. That's going to be the big key. Up next is the secondary class. Now, as I've said before, the biggest recruit on the board, I think we can all agree, is Xavion, right? That's the best DB recruit on the board. He doesn't visit this weekend. He visits another weekend. However, if Notre Dame's going to have the class that's needed, they've got to get at least two of the guys this weekend that are coming from the DB class. I feel Benjamin Morrison is the player Notre Dame is in best shape with right now. Alabama's recruiting him. Michigan is recruiting him. Washington's recruiting him. There's a lot of schools on him, but I think Notre Dame has done a tremendous job especially the last month with Mike Mickens and Marcus Freeman, really, really selling Notre Dame on Benjamin Morrison. I think they've been able to sell him on how great of a fit he is in the system. I mean, they want long corners that can press and run and be physical and play man coverage, play cover one. And Benjamin fits that. He's got all the traits you need. He just needs to get coached up. He needs a lot of work from a technique standpoint. But we broke down the film a couple weeks ago. I mean, you saw the length, you saw the toughness, you saw just the foot quickness, the agility is top notch. His ability to plant and drive is top notch. He can flip his hips pretty well when his technique is sound. He's a kid that to me is a very underrated recruit, and a must get for Notre Dame. He is a very, very important player. Devin Moore, I think, is just as important. The thing about Devin Moore that I love so much about him is I think Devin Moore can play – I think Benjamin Morrison can play both outside corner positions, which is very important. I think he's got the agility, range, cover skills, tackling ability to play to the field. I think he's got the size and length to be physical and playing to the boundary. With Devin Moore, I think Devin Moore can not only play both outside positions, I think Devin Moore could play the nickel very well, and as could Benjamin Morrison, but I think Devin Moore could also be a safety. I honestly think that if you look at considered the five DB positions in the Notre Dame defense, the two outside corners, the two safeties, and then the nickel, I could see Devin Moore starting at all five of those positions. There are the number of players in this class that you could say that about, you can count on one hand. And I would count on one hand and still have fingers left over. Xavion, as I've said, is the best DB recruit on the board. Xavion can't start at all five positions. He could start at three, right? This kid can start at all five and start at them at a level where you're going to feel really good about your chances to have a good secondary. He's extremely tall, 6'2", extremely smooth and fluid, love his feet. He doesn't quite yet have the top end speed that I see on film from Benjamin Morrison, but he's very smooth and fluid. But he's even longer than Benjamin Morrison. Not only is he just 2 inches taller, but he's got longer arms. This would be an ideal pair for Notre Dame on the outside. And then when you consider them being in the same coming year after you got Ryan Barnes, who's another very long corner, you have to feel great about where the cornerback board would be if they were able to get these two players. So Devin Moore, to me, is a very, very important recruit. And here's the thing about it, right? So let's say you get these two corners, and then last year you got Philip Riley and you got Ryan Barnes. Those are your top four ranked corners, and then Jaden Mickey. You've got five very talented corners that I graded out as four-star players. Here's the reality of it. Those five corners could all play in the same defense at the same time because Philip Riley has nickel safety traits. Devin Moore has safety traits. Ryan Barnes can play 2 to 3 positions in this defense. Devin Moore can play all 5 positions in this defense. Jaden Mickey can play at least 2 positions in this defense, and Benjamin Morrison can play at least 3 positions in this defense. The length and athleticism and versatility of that group of 5, and that's just the corners. We didn't even talk about JoJo and Chance Tucker and those type of guys. I mean, that would be an outstanding group of corners, and that is a big-time gap-closing group. And look, all 5 aren't going to pan out. But by getting that many good corners in back-to-back classes, you'd be able to put yourself in a position where even if only 2 or 3 of them pan out, you're going to have a heck of a cornerback group. And that's why the volume is so important with these guys is you need to be able to look at this group and say, this is the kind of range and athleticism that you want. And to be able to get it in Mike Mickens' first 2 classes would say a lot about his ability as a recruiter. So I think Devin Moore comes into this with a very, very important recruit. Now, here's where things stand with Devin Moore's recruitment. His is a little bit more tricky with Benjamin Morrison. Whereas with Benjamin Morrison, I feel like if Notre Dame knocks it out of the park this weekend, or even if Notre Dame doesn't have to knock it out of the park necessarily to get him, I think Notre Dame just has to close. That's what it's about. It's about close. He's right there. I think this is where he wants to be. You've done a great job. Now it's just closing. It's the same thing with Billy Shrouth. It's the same thing with Junior Tuialamaka. It's about close the deal. You've done all the work. Close the deal. Devin Moore's is a little bit interesting. A month ago, I'd have told you that Devin Moore was all but a lock to get to Notre Dame, to come to Notre Dame. They did a great job of recruiting him. Then Alabama and Florida got more involved as they saw more film and kind of did their homework on him. They have already both brought him in for unofficial visits in June. Now, the reason that they brought him in for unofficials is because they're trying to convince him to wait till the fall. They're trying to do that for two reasons. Number one is they want to expand the recruiting because they know that Notre Dame is the team to beat. And they know that if he decides now, it's going to be Notre Dame. Number two, both of those programs are still sort of putting their DB board together. From what I understand, they both like Devin Moore. They both want Devin Moore, but they're trying to slow the recruitment down so they can get him in the fall. They'll have time to kind of shore up their boards and figure out just where he would fit in and all those type of things. Notre Dame needs to make that very clear to him. Look, if you wanted to commit to those two schools right now, could you do that? Maybe you ask him that question. Maybe you ask him indirectly. I don't know if you necessarily want to say it. But if they wanted you so bad, why didn't they bring you in for officials this summer? Why are they trying to push it to the fall? Do they want you now or not? Notre Dame can say, hey, look, you want to commit to us right now. We're taking it. And we're shutting that, you get you and Benjamin, we're shutting that thing down. And I think that's a big selling point. He's a very high academic kid. That was his selling point initially, was that aspect of it. He's a very smart kid, comes from the kind of family that tends to be supportive of Notre Dame being the choice, if you get what I'm saying on that one. So I think that there's a lot of vibes there, but he is from Florida. He's from Naples. Gainesville's not that far away. And then Alabama's Alabama. So they've got their work cut out for him this weekend. But I do believe with a big weekend with Devin Moore that Notre Dame can kind of help seal the deal. And that's going to be important. I think that he's a kid that, he could end up deciding that he wants to slow things down. He could certainly end up doing that. But I think that a big visit could get him to realize, you know what, this is the school that wants me. They offer just as much as those other schools do when it comes to being able to compete for a championship. And they offer something that those schools can't, which is the academic side of things. Jake Pope is probably, to me, the biggest enigma of this group. I've had people tell me that others are reporting it's a Notre Dame, North Carolina battle. I think that's just because that's the first two schools he's visiting. He has an Ohio State visit coming up. He has a Alabama visit coming up. Georgia's he's been to plenty of times. I don't really have the same confidence of that Jake Pope's going to be in this class as I do as some others do. And I think a big reason for that is because I think the visits are going to have a bigger sway on him than people think. Now, am I saying that Notre Dame's not going to get him? No, I'm not saying that. I think Notre Dame has done a very good job recruiting Jake Pope. What I am saying, however, is that it's going to require a big visit this weekend and then a better visit this weekend than what he's going to have at some other schools. I think the places he's going to are knock your socks off type of visit places. I mean, they're going to roll up the red carpet, and it's going to be a lot of pomp and circumstance, a lot of showbiz, and all those kind of things. And while Notre Dame it does a lot of things to kind of catch your attention, they're just not that kind of program. And I'm not complaining about that. I think a lot of that stuff is fluff, and it doesn't really get you to understand where a kid is, in my opinion. So I feel like this is a situation where if they can really crush it this weekend with Jake Pope, then I'll feel better. I'll be as confident as maybe some others are in his recruitment. But I think this weekend's going to be a lot more important for him. And if they don't really knock it out of the park this weekend, then I could see them fading quickly for Jake Pope. So, and this is also going to be the first test for Chris O'Leary, right? This is going to be the first time he's going to be on campus as a main position coach with a top recruit coming on campus. How is he going to be able to connect with Jake? How's he going to be able to connect with Jake's family? What's his messaging going to be like? Is he going to be able to kind of garner that respect as a young coach that, hey, you know what? I can trust my son to go play for this guy. And with Jake, I see myself being developed into a great player under this guy. That's going to be the key. So those are the 9 coming on campus this weekend. They will all arrive tomorrow. Usually they stagger these things out a little bit when it comes to the arrival time, so that way each guy can kind of be greeted the right way. But as you see, those are 9 impact players. And if Notre Dame, to me, they have to, of those 9, I feel like they have to get at least 6 of them for this class. And I think you could even argue 7. But they have to get at least 6 of those guys, in my opinion, for this class to have any chance of being an elite group. I think they could get 4 or 5 and it can be a top 7 to 10 class, no question. But to be a top 5 class, they got to get at least 6 of the 9. And I think you could make a case for 7. Now, there's a visitor coming in Monday. And this is part of the visit as well. And he is a must get for Notre Dame. So, yes, you need to get 6 to 7 of the kids that are visiting this weekend, but they have to get Jalen Sneed. It's been a Notre Dame-Oregon battle for really, it's been a Notre Dame-Oregon battle for at least a month. And Oregon feels that they really knocked it out of the park with him this weekend. Notre Dame has been his leader for a while. We'll see kind of how the Oregon visit see if it wears off at all when he comes to Notre Dame. It will have been over a week since he was on campus there. But I think Notre Dame bringing him in sort of by himself, I don't know if this was planned or if this was just kind of based on his schedule. But to me, it couldn't have worked out any better. Because you're going to have him on campus with a couple commits who are big commits. And I don't mean just big from a skill standpoint, but you're talking about him being on campus with a guy that's 6'6", 260, and a guy that's 6'6", 235, they're going to be playing in front of him. I think that's going to be very important. Jalen Sneed, again, Notre Dame, Oregon. Notre Dame's got to knock it out of the park. He's been on campus before. He was on campus by himself this summer. It went well. He loved the visit. We had a story on it. Now you get him back. Now it's your chance to meet him face-to-face and to seal the deal. For Jalen, this is a seal-the-deal weekend. I think Oregon was able to really close the gap, but I don't think they were able to overcome Notre Dame. They did a great pitch. They sold him on, you're the guy that's going to send us over the top and all this other kind of stuff. They did a great job. They had all the right buttons with Jalen Sneed, but I still feel like Notre Dame is in a good place coming into the visit. If the visit goes well, I think he ends up at Notre Dame. If the visit doesn't go well, or if they don't really crush it, then I could see him maybe prolonging this recruitment a little longer than expected, which then gives Oregon the window to get back in. And then you have a window to where if a Clemson or an Alabama comes up short, maybe at some other positions, and they decide to jump into the mix, you know, how could that go? So I think that is really where you're starting getting really interesting when it comes to Jalen Sneed. If you get Jalen Sneed and you can get at least 6 of those other 9 visitors, you're going to have a hard time seeing Notre Dame get knocked out of the top 5. They're third, I believe, right now because Georgia just had 2 huge decommitments. So I believe Notre Dame is ranked 3rd. Let me just check here real quick. I'm going to check the two recruiting services. Obviously, Notre Dame was 4th on SI, 9 SI All-American, but we don't update the rankings all the time, like as far as just because we're not a point system. So we haven't had a chance to go in there yet and update where Notre Dame would stand in line with those. So, yes, in 24/7 Sports, they have now jumped ahead of Georgia, and Notre Dame right now on the 247 Sports rankings is closer in points to number 2 LSU than they are to number 4 Georgia. So that obviously is is big. So Notre Dame has jumped up there. Let's go check out the Rivals rankings. With Rivals, Notre Dame is 3rd again, and as I said, it's actually they're a little closer to Georgia at number 4 than they are LSU at number 2 at this point in time. So Notre Dame is in a position to finish with a great class, and they're in a situation where if they can just have a great weekend this weekend, how do you get them out of there? And let's go through it, right? So Jalen Sneed right now is a consensus top 100 recruit. Anthony Lucas is a top 30 recruit by 247 Sports. Rivals just finally got him ranked in their top 250. He jumped in I think the 140s yesterday. He's a guy to me that is a surefire, not just a top 100 recruit, but to me, Anthony Lucas is a top 30 to 40 recruit. He's at least a top 50 recruit. Rivals jumped him into number 149. He was unranked before, so that's a big jump. Billy Shrouth is a top 150 recruit. Jake Taylor's a top 250 recruit. Tobias Merriweather's a top 150-ish recruit. On Rivals, I think 247 has him ranked much higher than Rivals does. I'm actually going to pull up his profile now to check his overall recruiting profile. But Tobias is a guy that to me is a surefire top 100 recruit. Dallin Hayden's a top 200 recruit. Junior Tuihalamaka is a top 100 recruit. Benjamin Morrison's a top 200 recruit. Devin Moore's a 3-star, but his films he's going to get a much bigger jump. I talked to somebody recently that told me that there's a chance 247 is going to give him a big jump as well. And then, of course, we talked about Jalen Sneed. So if I were to say today Notre Dame's going to get 6 of those 9, who would it be? I would predict Tobias Merriweather to Notre Dame. I'd predict Billy Shrouth to Notre Dame, Anthony Lucas to Notre Dame, Junior Tuihalamaka to Notre Dame, Benjamin Morrison to Notre Dame, and Devin Moore to Notre Dame. That's sort of my prediction. It's not telling you they're going to commit. I just feel good about where things stand. And that means Dallin Hayden, Jake Taylor, and Jake Pope are the 3 guys that I'm less certain of. So if you got to close on the guys that I think you're going to get: Tobias, Billy Shrouth, Anthony Lucas, Junior Tuihalamaka, Benjamin Morrison, Devin Moore. Not all those guys are locks. Most of those guys aren't locks. Some of them are, I think. But if you got to close the deal on those 6. If you get those 6, that's a home run. Get anything beyond that is huge for Notre Dame. So then it comes down to Dallin Hayden, Jake Taylor, Jake Pope. The more guys of that group you get, the better you're going to be. And I think that's where Notre Dame is at this point in time, is they have to be able to close on those players. If they can close on those players, then I think this class has a chance to be very, very – on those 3 players, then this class has a chance to be very, very special and a truly elite class for Notre Dame, the best of the Brian Kelly era, without question, in my opinion. And that's why I say this weekend has, in my opinion, the most gap closers of any weekend. And not only that, but it's the gap closers that Notre Dame is in the best shape with. And that's where we're at. So now there's also some 2023 kids that are going to be coming on campus that are very, very important. We're not hearing a lot of talk at. One is Keon Keeley, the defensive end from Florida. He's supposed to be on campus this weekend. He's from Tampa Berkeley Prep. He's a Notre Dame kid through and through. I really like where things stand with him. Have for a while. Notre Dame has been all over him. He's the kind of guy that Mike Elson is going to love. He's the kind of guy that you look at and you say, 6'6", long arms, great burst, frame that you're going to add a lot of size and weight to. This is the kind of guy that Mike Elson has just dreamed about for years. This is a Mike Elson special. And Notre Dame has made a hard push for him. Sonny Styles, we all know about Sonny Styles. He's supposed to be on campus this weekend. Alex Birchmeyer is an offensive lineman from Virginia who's one of the top 2023 targets for Notre Dame on the offensive line. He's going to be on campus this weekend. And then Tuesday, and I'm still trying to get confirmation with this from AJ. Let me see if he's nope, still no confirmation on that one. But he's supposed to be on campus on Tuesday. Now, that is an interesting one because he grew up a Notre Dame fan. Family's Notre Dame fans, but Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, all those schools have been making a hard push for him because he's an elite 5-star corner. Notre Dame's going to have a great visit with him to stay in that game. If they can have a great visit, then I can think they can stay in that game and ultimately win that battle. But if they don't knock it out and keep it, just really keep it tight right now and keep themselves in it right now, then that one could go in a different direction as well. So that's where things stand with 2023 kids. The top 2023 kids are going to be on campus. So that's where things stand. So now we're going to open it up to questions. So we're going to get, as I said, Vince is not able to talk today, but he is still emceeing it behind the scenes. So hopefully he's locked in here and ready to get some questions going. So, so let's dive into some questions here. I'm going to get this screen down. Let's remove that and dive some questions. So we can talk about this weekend's visits. I'd like to kind of stick, ideally, most of these questions to that. But if you have some other questions, of course, we'll answer them. But we will have a Friday mailbag tomorrow. So if you have some team questions, maybe you might want to wait until tomorrow. But Vince, if there are questions there about the team, feel free to throw them up. And, of course, the first question is about the team, not recruiting. Jeff Fluke says, missed the show yesterday, but had a question after. I'm not sure of the day-to-day work Reese and Kelly perform, but is there anything they can do to help in the wide receiver room to help better prepare? I think it's just about, creating an environment that's just a better place. It's giving Coach Alexander the opportunities to thrive, demanding that he does thrive, and basically saying, look, this is what you have to do. Go get it done. And if you don't, we're going to have to find somebody who will. At the end of the day, Tommy Reese has his own position to coach. He has to coordinate the entire offense. He cannot be someone responsible for, coaching the wide receivers. They have to set the standard, and it's up to Coach Alexander to meet that standard and live up to that standard. So are there things they can do to encourage them? Sure. But at the end of the day, Del Alexander has to step up and get this job done. Yeah, Emma Leahy sold on Xavion Bradshaw. Yep. Welcome to the club. Yeah, his coach compared him to Antonio Brown. I did not compare him to Antonio Brown. I just make sure that we're clear on that one. It is an article about, and he goes by Xavion Turner Bradshaw. So obviously his mom's name is Turner, I would seem, or maybe there's a stepdad involved. I'm not quite sure what that is, but so we're trying to update our stories and calling him Xavion Turner Bradshaw out of respect. All right, see what's next. You trying to find some more questions there, Vince? Okay. All right, looks like we have a lot of comments here, but not as many questions. And real quick, before Vince gets to some questions, Emma says, okay, Ryan Harris was outstanding yesterday, best one yet, when he said every time he came out of the field for a home game. So, look, yesterday I did an interview. It was not live. It is on the site now, or it's on the channel now, and it's on the website now. But we did an interview with Ryan Harris, who's a former Notre Dame offensive lineman, obviously, was also a guy that played for my Denver Broncos. Obviously, if you guys know, I'm a Denver Bronco fan. And he won a Super Bowl. He was part of Denver's last Super Bowl team. Great guy. I've had a chance to meet Ryan several times while covering Notre Dame. Really smart, knowledgeable football guy, too. And so we had him on the show yesterday talking about Blake Fisher. Obviously, Ryan was the last true freshman to start at left tackle for Notre Dame. So I thought, who better to talk about Blake Fisher being a starting left tackle at Notre Dame than the last guy that started at left tackle for Notre Dame. So that obviously was a lot of fun to do with him. Ryan is a really, really smart football guy. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. It's at the Irish Break. It's on the Irish Breakdown YouTube channel. It's also on the Irish Breakdown website. So please give that a watch. Tom M. So St. John Bosco and Mater Dei are the two best high schools in the country. No question. Why can't Indy get more kids from there? Well, I'm assuming he means like best real high schools, not like the feeder school like IMG on that one. But certainly two of the best, no question. Honestly, I don't know, Tom, if they've had the best recruiters out west in recent seasons, to be completely honest with you. There also haven't been look, a lot of the guys that have come out of those programs have come from they're at positions where Notre Dame just has struggled a little bit with recruiting. I mean, you've got quarterbacks and skill players that Notre Dame hasn't done great with. I mean, but look, Notre Dame also got a kid from De La Salle. De La Salle's pretty good, right? De La Salle's plays with those teams, sometimes beats some of those teams. Obviously, that's Isaiah Foskey, but I just think they've just gotten beat. I mean, simple as that. And some of the kids they haven't wanted. Like, so Tommy Brown, the offensive lineman, they could have got him a couple years ago, but they just passed on him, which was a smart decision because I don't think he was a Notre Dame kind of guy. But they've just got beat by guys. I mean, they've tried to recruit some of these guys. They've just got out recruited by him, to be honest with you. And I think part of that is because some of these guys are offensive players, and they haven't done as good of a job recruiting on that side of the ball in some of those tough spots. And I think also because Brian Polian's not as dynamic of a recruiter as people think he is. And so, he still gets a lot of credit for the things he did in the Charlie Weiss era, but anyone that followed recruiting back then knows that had as much to do, if not more to do with Charlie Weiss than it did with Brian Polian. So, and then Dale Alexander's been a primary recruiter out there, and he hasn't proven to be a strong recruiter. So I think those things have really hurt Notre Dame. Coleman Smith, which of these guys would you put on commit watch? So Coleman, that kind of goes back to the original question. I'm going to, I think let's pull that up again. I don't necessarily want to put guys on commit watch because then I feel like that's kind of giving away people's things. But I feel like the guys that if I had to predict today who I would predict Notre Dame would get with a good visit, as long as things go well this weekend, I have Tobias Merriweather ultimately ending up in the class, Billy Shrouth, Anthony Lucas, Junior Tuilamaka, Benjamin Morrison, and Devin Moore, and then Jalen Sneed. That's who I'd predict today. Are there anybody that I'm saying this guy is going to commit this weekend? There's really only two. And I'm not going to say who those are, but there's only two that I think will commit this weekend. I think what we're going to see instead is guys that are going to commit in a week or two or by the end of the month. Some of these guys are going to want to finish their visits and things like that. But those are the six from this weekend, and then Jalen Sneed on Monday that if I had to predict, I'd predict Notre Dame to get them, but I wouldn't necessarily put all those guys on commit watch. And when I say commit watch, what I'm kind of thinking that we're talking about here is guys are going to commit this weekend. And that, to me, my list for that is only, as of right now, is only two. If more than two guys commit, I'm not even necessarily saying they're going to get two this weekend. But if more than two do commit this weekend, it means Notre Dame absolutely crushed it in recruiting. But if they don't get more than two, or if they don't even get those two, I'm not worried. It's more about, did you hold steady? Because most of these kids aren't planning on committing this weekend. There's at least one kid on there that I feel very strongly that they're going to get, who definitely isn't going to make his announcement this weekend. So we'll have to see how things play out. But I feel good that when it's all said and done, they'll get, that those are the guys that I think that they'll get. Yes, John, there's definitely some gap erasers on that list, and that's what's so big about it. I mean, I won't pull it back up again. I should probably just stop taking this down and just leave it up there. I mean, he's probably better looking than I am anyway. Stop laughing, Vince. I see you laughing off the screen there. I would say Tobias Merriweather fits that category. I would say Anthony Lucas fits that category. I would say Jalen Sneed fits that category as far as gap erasers. Now, you can make the case that Jake Taylor, but see, I don't think there's a gap to be erased on the offensive line. So it's kind of hard for me to call those guys gap closers or gap erasers when Notre Dame basically is already there. What those guys do is those guys allow you to continue being elite at that position. So if Notre Dame wasn't where they needed to be on the offensive line, then at least I would put Jake Taylor in that gap eraser category and Billy Shrouth in a gap closer category. I think that those are the guys that I look at and say those are the gap erasers. And I don't know if Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore individually erases that gap, but I really feel like if you get both of them, you take such a bigger chunk out of that gap combined with last year than you would with just one of them. I mean, both of them individually are gap closers, in my opinion. They're both gap closers. But if you put both of them in the same class with Jade Mickey and with Ryan Barnes and Philip Riley last year, especially Ryan Barnes, man, it's been a long time since Notre Dame would have had a back-to-back cornerback class like that. Very, very long time. Thank you. I think this was a great topic as well. Yes, and James. So look, so here's the deal. I sit kind of crooked. So the shirts are actually squared up, but I sit weird. So that's why they look kind of tough. But yes, this is what the shirt looks like. Okay. We have this version of it on the merch store, which you can find at the first link in the description below. I also have a white and a gray one. Now, the white and the gray ones are actually reverse color. So like the white shirt, actually the gap closers is blue, and this is still green, but it's still a blue IB. And then I had a specially made one that it just shipped out yesterday, but it's going to be gray. Gap closers are going to be written in blue with gold outline, and then it's actually going to have this same white IB one. So I'm going to see how it looks, and if I like the way it looks, I'm going to add that to the store because the current gray one we have is just blue and gold trim, and then a blue IB here. So instead of the white IB, it's a blue IB because a white IB on a white shirt I didn't think looked great. Vince is getting a polo. Just ordered a polo for Vince to wear this season, which is white with the white IB. When that comes in, we'll have a chance to look and see how the white on white looks. And if we like it, then we'll add that to the store as well. Because as I've said, I want the stuff to be quality. And so far I think that it is. So yeah, if you like it, you can have one for a pretty good price, I think. Just check on the merch store below. We've actually sold a few of these, so I'm not the only person on the planet right now that has a Gap Closer shirt. There's a couple other people that now own Gap Closer shirts. Xavion Turner Bradshaw does not have a visit scheduled as of right now. Notre Dame has talked to him about possibly visiting in the fall. That's what they're talking about. So hopefully it happens, and hopefully ends up in the class. But right now I'm not looking at it. Does Weeks have a visit scheduled so he can get an offer? Are you thinking of Ricky Collins? And you keep saying Ricky Weeks like you're confusing him with the second baseman from the old second baseman of the Brewers, because I don't know who Weeks is. If you're talking about Ricky Collins, my understanding is he's going to be on campus on June 17th. That's what he had told me the last time we talked. I'll check in with him soon. So Jordan, if you can let me know if there's a quarterback named Weeks that I am not aware of, then I will certainly check that out. But as of right now, if you're talking about Ricky Collins, he is expected to be on campus next week at some point in time. Yes, Jojo Pineda, definitely get me Lucas. Yes, 100%. That's a big one. That'd be a huge recruiting win for Notre Dame. They got it, but then this is the weekend. You got to close. You got to get it done. Jason says graphics and presentation look great today. Thank you for that. I'm trying to get a little better about that. Vince approves of that as well. Mr. I can't talk, so I can't be on the show. Jojo asked, Coach, I don't know why Notre Dame is not gonna get involved with Koval, so I wonder if it's Pope and Winston. So, as I said yesterday, it's not that they're not going to get involved with Koval. They recruited him. There's just some things that, it's just not a fit, right? How about that? We can leave it at that. It's just not a fit at this point in time. He's a guy that just I think that it's not so much that they think other guys are better players as much as it's just there's other guys that are just better fits for Notre Dame. How about that? We'll say that. We'll leave it at that and start focusing our attention on other guys. But Pope and Winston would be a good safety class. I don't think it'd be a great safety class. I think to have a great safety class, I think you'd have to need Nwangwu, but that's a good safety class. It helps solidify the depth chart, and there's some ceiling with those two kids. Both of them, they've got some concerns and some problem areas, but they both have really nice ceilings, which could make for end up down the road maybe being better than I projected to be right now. Yes, Coleman Smith says, I think Xavion Bradshaw is the only receiver target left on the board under 6'2", and can run after the catch. That's the whole point, Coleman. That's my frustration and my confusion is you say you want more playmakers, but then all your receivers are big, tall, vertical guys that do the same things that you've had in 2012 when you scored 14 points against Bama, and 2018 when you scored 3 against Clemson, and this past year when you scored 10 and 14 against Clemson and Alabama. And let's be honest, 3 of the touchdowns you scored in those 4 games were late in the game mop-up points. The same kind of offense you had when you only scored 19 points against Georgia. It's the same kind of offense you had, the same kind of players you had when you only scored 17 points against Georgia the second time you played. They have to do better. They have to be more diverse with the guys they're recruiting. And, you could say, well, look at the guys on the roster now, but the reality is the guy that primarily recruited those players is gone. And the staff, as it's constructed now, you look at what they're doing. Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas. Again, Deion Colsey is a heck of a player. And now you're looking at the guys they're recruiting now. And look, here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with getting big receivers. I love Deion Colsey. I love Tobias Merriweather. I mean, you guys know how much I talk him up, but you can't only have those kind of guys. You need to have some diversity in your style of play. And it's not about size even. It's about style of play. And if you're going to be a team that's going to be an explosive offense, you have to have guys that can take it the distance every time they touch the ball. And so my question is when Chris Tyree leaves, he'll be gone, Lindsey will be gone, Keys will be gone. Who are your game breakers at that point in time? Who are the game breakers? There's really only one, and that's potentially Lorenzo Styles. All those other guys are very good football players. as much as I love the backs from last year, they're not the explosive threats that Chris Tyree is. You look at the receivers. There's a lot of good receivers in that group, but they're not the kind of guys that are going to take a hitch against Bama or a slant against Bama or a quick RPO against Bama and go the distance. They're just not. And that has proven to not be as effective when you only have one type of receiver. It's just not as effective. And that's the issue that I have. And, to Kenny's point, if Notre Dame wants Bradshaw, they have a funny way of showing it. That's what I'm saying. I don't think right now they necessarily want him. Jojo Panay says, Coach D feeling really confident Taylor over Rice if it's the pick of both of them. Yeah, for me it's Taylor, and I don't think twice about it. I mean, I could end up being really wrong down the road, and I think Jack Rice will be a better player early because I think he's more physically ready to play. But I think when it's all said and done, I think Jake Taylor is going to be the better player. I could be wrong on that, but that's the conviction I have watching film and projecting the skill sets to the next level. I don't know, Brian. I've been hearing through the rumor mill that you aren't very high on Lucas or Bradshaw. Yeah, and I don't think Tobias Merriweather's any good either. Yeah, no, you're right. No, I get it. I mean, I think those guys are big-time players, but, I mean, that's what we're doing here, right? Like, what's the whole point of this recruiting thing? Is it to just continue to be good enough to beat the teams you've been beating, or is it to try to close the gap on the best programs? Look, we're all in at Irish Breakdown on gap closers, right? I mean, that's what it needs to be. What we don't know, and I think the defensive staff is all in on gap closers. I just don't think they're doing it on offense. I don't think they have the confidence really in themselves even to do it, which is why I think they convince themselves that some guys are better than they really are and why they continue to be surprised when they can't move the football against really good teams. Coleman Smith says, Jalen Sneed killed my school on the court and field in region play. Truly a gap closer athletically. I want him bad. Yeah, because Jalen also plays basketball. He's a pretty good basketball player, even though he's not real tall. Blake Sofa, yes. So just here's the deal. You're watching the show. If you're going to leave, before you leave, whether it's in the middle of the show or at the end, please hit that like button. Please subscribe, and then share this too. Share this with people. Share this with your friends. Share it on social media. Share it on your Facebook page. Whatever type of things you can share a video on, please share this stuff. That's how you can help us grow. Number one, it helps us with the analytics and those types of things, which helps, which means YouTube will promote our work more. But I like even more the grassroots growth. It's great that if YouTube starts pushing us more and we get more subscribers, that's awesome. Obviously, I want that. But I really like the organic thing. I like the word of mouth thing. Like, hey, why are you listening to the show? My buddy who is a Notre Dame fan, he got me onto this show. Like, that's how I like to see it grow. And that can't happen. I can't do all that, right? My reach is only so far. I need you all to help us out. So hit the subscribe button, like the show, hit the notification bell, but then also share this. Share when you think we've done a really good show, put it on Twitter, put it on Facebook, put it on all your social media channels, and spread the word and say, hey, look, at 1:00 every day, try to make it easy for you. 1:00 every day. That's how it's going to be during the week. Jojo says, I think Sneed and Junior are coming. Hopefully they knock it out of the parks, as you will say, Coach. I hope so too. I mean, I feel good about where Notre Dame is with both of those kids, but here's the thing you have to understand. There have been times with Notre Dame and other schools, this isn't just a Notre Dame thing, where you lead for a kid coming into the visit and the visit doesn't go well. He doesn't click with an assistant coach, doesn't like how far away it is from home, doesn't click with the players. The players don't click with him. There's been times where Notre Dame was going to get a kid. This is a true story. There's been times where Notre Dame, multiple times when a kid visited, Notre Dame was his leader. He wanted to commit to Notre Dame, but the players came back and said, yeah, coach, you don't want this guy. This is what he was doing in the dorms. This is how he was talking. This is this guy doesn't fit our culture. And the Notre Dame coaching staff passed on those kids. So the visits have to go well on both sides for this to close the deal. But yes, to your point, JoJo, I feel really good about where Notre Dame is with both Junior and Jalen Sneed coming into the visit. Now it's just about closing the deal. Maddie K, I'm very excited for this weekend. A lot of talent coming to campus, and we can see a couple commits maybe after these visits. Any thoughts, Brian, on who could possibly commit? We've talked a little bit about that. I think that there's two guys that I could see committing this weekend, but I'm not necessarily predicting either. I think at the end of the day, of this entire group, there's obviously two commits on there. I could see at least seven of these guys being in the class. Anything beyond that is just, I mean, all the stars have aligned in perfect order, and Notre Dame has just absolutely dominated recruiting. And I don't see that happening, but it's a possibility. As I said, there's not a single kid on this list that Notre Dame isn't, in my opinion, the top 3 for as of right now. Not one. And that's a pretty good – I mean, that's more than a puncher's chance. That's you really got a legitimate shot of really crushing it with this group. Now we just got to see him do it. Coleman Smith Jr. really reminds me of Manti. Hopefully he turns out like that at Notre Dame. I don't think he's quite as athletic as Manti was. I think there's a lot of similarities from Manti. I think he's a little bigger than Manti was at the same age. I think his power is similar to Manti. I think Manti was a little bit more explosive athletically than Junior is, so I don't want to put that Manti hype on him just yet, but their style of play is similar. Their body types are similar. Their football IQ is similar, but Junior's not quite on the level Manti was coming out. I mean, Manti was a top 10 national player. Junior's more of a top 100 kind of guy. Dylan Hoffman said Junior seemed to really like Texas. Hope Notre Dame can win him over. I mean, look, these kids are going to love all these visits. I mean, we see kids say, "Oh, I love this place," and then 3 days later they commit somewhere else. And again, I get what these kids say on social media, right? I mean, Amorian Walker was telling Ole Miss, "Oh yeah, I like it. I'm going to be back." He's telling Notre Dame a different story. Let's see what they say. I mean, what do you expect them to say? I loved my visit to Texas, but I'm never going to be back because I'm going to commit to Notre Dame next week. I mean, what are you expecting them to say? So I wouldn't put too much into what kids say on social media. I mean, we've seen kids say, "Hey, my recruitment's open and I'm taking all visitors," and then 2 days later they commit. I mean, and I'm Notre Dame 2164. I'm so nervous for this weekend. I get it, because if they don't knock it out of the park this weekend, it's a big step back for what this team could be from a recruiting standpoint. It's going to be really hard to have a truly gap closing class if they don't have a great weekend this weekend. The whole month is vitally important. We've made that case. This is the most important weekend, in my opinion, of the month. AJ asks, are recruits and families honest about when a visit doesn't go very well? I don't feel like I have ever seen an article written after recruit visits that says that the visit didn't go great. They're honest with so I guess my question is, how do you gauge if the visit didn't go well? I think number one, you talk to sources, talk to the high school coach, talk to Notre Dame coaches, and people tell you like, yeah, it didn't go well. I mean, kids, as I said, kids are always going to say that, right? When was the last time you read an article where a kid said the visit didn't go well? But visits don't go well sometimes. But most of these kids are respectful and classy enough and are raised the right way to say, hey, look, there's no need to burn that bridge, right? Just say it went great and you move on. I think the things that you look for is when kids just speak in generalities and they're not overly talkative when they normally are talkative, that's a giveaway. But a lot of times, honestly, AJ, it's just going to be about talking to sources and just say, hey, look, we felt good coming in, but we don't feel as good about it right now. Well, what happened? Oh, here's what happened. This is what happened. And sometimes you'll kind of get a clue. Like it was, remember when Joseph Osai visited several years ago? The kid fell asleep during the game. I mean, my wife took a picture of the kid like this, asleep. Like, okay, the kid's sleeping during a Notre Dame game. He ain't coming to Notre Dame, right? What was it? Jeremiah Holloman, a receiver who went to Georgia. Him and his mom are tweeting about the Georgia game while on their visit to Notre Dame. He's not coming. So I think sometimes kids give you obvious clues, but more often than not, they're subtle ones and they're things that really you're only going to get from your sources. Or here's the other one. If a kid has been super talkative to you as a reporter and say you cover Notre Dame and the kid talks to me all the time, but then after the visit, he won't return a phone call, that's usually a bad sign. That's usually a sign that the visit didn't go overly well. So that's where I'm at with that one. Jojo, Coach D, quick question. A lot of kids of these kids that are visiting all these schools after there are no visits allowed for the first time. So how do the kids slow it down after a visit and decide to school for them? It's going to be different for every kid. I think a lot of it, Jojo, is just what are your criteria going in? I think when you've really schooled a kid well on preparing for the visits, what it's going to be is it's going to be, hey, here are the things I'm looking for. Which schools checked off the boxes? Okay, relationships, check. Scheme fit, check. Honesty, check. Academic, whatever, check. I mean, player fit, check. And then you kind of go through it, and sometimes you say, look, I think all the schools check the boxes, but I just felt more at home at this place. And so there's all types of different things that go into it, but usually it's about kids have an idea of what they're looking for before a visit starts. And it's going to be about which school did the best in regards to kind of getting them to that point. I think that's really what it boils down to. All right, JoJo says, how would you like a class of the cornerback Mickey and Morrison and Moore plus safety of Pope and Winston? I think that's a very good overall DB class. I think that's a very good DB class. What I would say is it's a much better cornerback class, however, than it is a safety class. I think it's a good safety class. It's a nice duo after the group you had last year. You could argue it's a gap closing class when you consider how bad Notre Dame's depth chart is at safety, which Vince and I talked about the other day. So you can argue that it's a gap closer from that standpoint, but I think to me it closes the gap, close the gap a little bit, whereas the cornerback group would close the gap significantly. I mean, that's like time taking, like, yeah, you took a step in the right direction at safety. That cornerback class would be like an Edwin Moses long jump towards, closing the gap. And if you're under my age, you probably don't know who the heck Edwin Moses is, but if you're older than me, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But basically he could jump really, really far. And then that's essentially what it would boil down to. All right, let's see the next question. All righty, Brendan Burtis. First time I think I've seen this name before, Brendan. If this is your first time, I appreciate you joining the show. What aspects of the game do Pope and Winston project well to the next level? What limitations will they have in their college game? So let me say out of the park that I have seen very limited film of KJ Winston. So part of my hesitation with KJ Winston is just limited film. He played a really shortened junior season because of COVID in the state of Maryland and in the DC area. So there's not a lot of film. But here's what I like about KJ Winston. I think he's a big, long, rangy hitter. He plays downhill. He plays aggressive. Actually, while we're talking about, let's just try to pull up some film. He's got good size. I think he's over 6'1". He's about at least 190 pounds, and he's a guy that can stick. What I have. And I think he shows me very good downhill traits, right? I think he's a kid that shows me very good, burst down the field, very good physicality, those type of things. But what I don't see from him is a guy that shows me a lot of fluidity in the hips, a guy that shows me a lot of change of direction and some of those things. Now, that could be just an opportunity, right? He just hasn't been asked to do it a lot, but, that's just something I got to see more. We haven't seen a lot of film of him playing man coverage. The only time I've really seen any film of him playing man coverage is when he's playing in summer camps. Vince, could you take that question down so we can just kind of focus on just the kids' film? So you see there, a little choppy there on that particular clip, right? And this is kind of what I'm talking about. Just a good athlete, a good downhill player, but not a super sudden, not a super fluid guy. But look at that though, right? That's the thing you like about KJ Winston. Watch this kid. Done. Right? That's what he brings to the table. And that's why I say he's an alley player right now. He's a guy that eventually could maybe grow into a rover, but I don't see that because they are recruiting so many rovers. So that's the thing I like about KJ Winston at this point in time. And he's just a guy to me that brings a lot of just physicality to the game. And so this is a nice play on offense here. Not a burner by any stretch, but he's not an unathletic player either. I just see a guy that is going to need a lot of technical work. He's going to need a lot of work on working backwards. I think he's much better working forwards than he is working backwards, which if that continues to be the case in college, it limits his positional flexibility a little bit. Like, he's not a guy that I'm going to necessarily want playing the deep middle, for example. You have to be more of a hash guy. You have to maybe be more of an alley player with him. That's another big stick right there. You can see a lot of that from him. And those are the things that I really like about KJ Winston. Jake Pope's an interesting cat too, because Jake's a guy that he's not as big as KJ Winston. This is not as thick. He's listed, I believe, like 6'1". I don't know if he looks quite that tall in film. He's a guy that to me is very fluid, he's kind of the opposite of KJ Winston. He's not the big hitter that KJ Winston is, but he's a very fluid guy, really nice feet, really elusive, good player on offense, good player on defense, can play some slot corner. I think he covers relatively well. He's pretty rangy guy, can play center field. Not as powerful as KJ Winston, but a really smooth and fluid athlete that I think is also instinctive. I think both of these kids have pretty good football IQs. I think Jake Pope is probably a little bit more instinctive at this point in time. I think part of that is just opportunity. Like I said, KJ played 3 games as a junior in high school. A lot of times that IQ comes from you have it, but it gets it becomes more and more obvious the more you play, the more you see, the more you know, hey, you can't know how to react to something if you just have never seen it. And so I think that's one of the things that I think gives Jake an advantage right now over KJ is just playing experience. And that's why I'm curious to see. KJ is one of those guys that I look at and say, I'm really curious to see what his senior film looks like. Because he could end up blowing up and being like a top 150 guy, or he could be a guy that you still look at and say, boy, that guy's going to need a little bit of work. So that's how I'd answer that one. If ifs and buts were cookies and nuts, we'd all have a good Christmas. That's why recruiting is so hard. I would want more than just cookies and nuts for Christmas to have a good Christmas. I'm sorry. I'm going to need a little bit more than that, old Grim. But look, that's why I say this weekend, like that's why I'm trying to say to everybody, I feel good about where things stand, but you got to close. I mean, that's where you're at. You have to close. So, of course, how many of these recruits are gap closers? We kind of went through that a little bit earlier. I'll pull it up again. I think you can make a case that all these guys in some – because, again, we've talked about this. We have 2 types of gap closers at Notre Dame, right? We have guys that are just the impact, like this guy could go to Alabama and play. This guy could go – to this other school and be just an impact dominant player right away. And then there's the guys that maybe they aren't that, but they're better than what you've had, or they make your position group better than maybe what it's been. I think when you look at Notre Dame right now, I think that this group right here, I think you can make a case that every guy on this list to some degree is a gap closer. I think that Jake Pope's probably be at the bottom of this list, but I think every single one of these guys closes the gap from where you are now to that next program. Some of them close the gap a little bit faster. Tobias closes the gap faster. Anthony Lucas all but erases the gap at defensive tackle. Jalen Sneed and Junior Chukwualamaka, to me, close the gap. That cornerback class of Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore, if they're together, would certainly be a gap closing class. So this goes back, Scott, to my original point, which is this is why this weekend is so big for Notre Dame, because there's so many of these types of players on campus. I mean, there's not some of the guys there's some guys in other weekends that I'm like, yeah, he's a good player and all these other kind of things. But, he's got some more holes in his game. I mean, Jake Pope would be one of the top recruits on some other weekends. But in this weekend, he's kind of at the bottom of the list, which just tells you how good this weekend is. But look, every single one of these kids is a take for Notre Dame. Every single one is a take for Notre Dame and should be a take for Notre Dame and would improve this recruiting class and improve the roster, in my opinion. Richard Robbins says, I watched tape of Anthony Lucas because of you, Brian. Thank you. I always want you to always watch film. Don't just take my word for it. Watch the film. All I can say is, wow, hell of a prospect. If he committed, I love this class. I could not agree more. As Jeff said at the very beginning, when I watch Anthony Lucas film, I get the feels. There's no question about it. All right, let's see what the next question is there. Vince. Brian Denbo, with this many recruits on campus, is this done job fair style, different coaches, different times? No, not really. I mean, look, I would imagine that as long as the coaches are around players, you're not going to see Chris O'Leary around anyone not named Jake Pope, right? You're going to see Marcus Freeman spending time with the 5 guys, but at different times. Who else is Dell Alexander going to be talking to this weekend? Who else is Lance Taylor going to be talking to this weekend? So it's not necessarily that. There's times and places where the coordinator's with this group or that group. He's not always with all 5. So, and then obviously Brian Kelly will meet with these guys individually, but with a group this small, there's going to be a lot of think about it. There's more coaches at Notre Dame, full-time coaches at Notre Dame, than there are recruits on campus. That's a really great ratio to have. And then you throw in the analysts and the GAs and the staff and all these other kind of things. I would imagine Jake Pope's going to have Chris O'Leary and Kerry Cooks around him a lot this weekend, and probably some of Mike Mickens at times, and Marcus Freeman and Brian Kelly. So these kids are going to get a lot of individual attention. Whereas like a job fair, to use your point, there's like 15, 20 people for jobs, and then there's 200 kids trying to get jobs there. This is a complete opposite. This is essentially a one-on-one, at worst two-on-one type of situation. MT41, just wondering if you could only take one, why would you take Jake Taylor over Rice? Because I think he's a better player, and I think he's a better fit for Notre Dame, and that's a big, important thing. At Alabama, I think Zach Rice might be a better fit there than Jake Taylor because Alabama doesn't necessarily emphasize the athleticism, the range. They are a power football team in the box. Notre Dame has done better when they've had more athletic linemen. Ronnie Stanley, Liam Eichenberg being more athletic, in my opinion, than Mike McGlinchey. Robert Hainsey's a pretty quality athlete on the edge because they're an outside zone, get to the next level, be quick out of your stance type of offense. And I think Jake Taylor is an elite, is a borderline elite athlete for that position. I think he's got great power. He's got great length. I think he's also a guy that when I look at Zach Rice, I ask myself, how much bigger is Zach Rice going to get? How much stronger is Zach Rice going to get? He's a guy that needs to get a lot quicker. He's a short area power guy. And in that role, he is dominant. But to me, I want the guy that can be the better athlete. And then also Jake Taylor packs a lot of punch for a kid that's 270, 275 pounds. He does have a lot of room to add weight and size and strength. And you look and say, he's not even close, in my opinion, to tapping his full potential. Whereas I think Zach Rice is kind of like a Wyatt Davis, where I don't know how much better Wyatt Davis was considered this great prospect when he was like a sophomore at Ohio State. And everybody kept waiting on him to get better, and he never got better because when Wyatt Davis showed up at Ohio State, that's kind of who he was going to be. Then you look at a guy like Zach Rice, and I see a similar type of guy. Now, I think he's better than Wyatt Davis was coming out of high school, but similar kind of guy. Jake Taylor's more of a Zach Martin, more of a Robert Hainsey, even though Robert Hainsey played as a freshman, Robert Hainsey got better and better and better and better every year because he got bigger, he got stronger, he developed his body. Even though his technique was already advanced, his body kept growing. Well, Jake Taylor has room to grow his body and technical work that still needs to be improved upon. So I think there's a lot more room between him and his ceiling than Zach Rice and his ceiling. And I think right now, Jake Taylor's every bit as good as Zach Rice. So that's why as a prospect, I think that you could look at it and say that's why I think Jake Taylor is going to be a better player. Jojo Pineda says, thank you, Coach D, for having Ryan Harris. Awesome interview and inside perspective, especially since he started at left tackle as a freshman. Yeah, that was a fun interview. We're gonna try to get Ryan back on again. Jay Wiki Jr. Sorry if this is a dumb question. How will the sanctions and such for Brian Kelly taking a picture of someone and another recruit doing something else, which I can't remember, affect scholarships? It won't. It just affected, like, he can't go on visits for a certain time. It was a slap on the wrist, like $5,000 fine, something like that. All right, Jordan Schreiber asks, which of the three running backs do you think Notre Dame has the best shot at getting a commitment this month? Honestly, Jordan, it's a bit of a cop-out, but it's the truth. I can't tell you that until they visit. I mean, I think that I don't think Notre Dame leads for any of them. I think Notre Dame is second for all of them. So it boils down to this, Jordan, is which kid do they have the best visit with? They're going to try to have a great visit with all of them. But it's going to come down to which kid do they have the best visit with, and then how does that relate to the other visits that they have? I think it's a Notre Dame-Ohio State battle for Dallin Hayden. I think it's a Notre Dame-Penn State battle for Nicholas Singleton. And it's a Notre Dame-USC-Oklahoma battle for Gavin Sawchuk. I think Notre Dame is second for all of them. So whoever they have the best visit with is the guy that they're gonna get. I don't know which guy that's going to be. So that's where I'm at with that. Jordan also says, if Notre Dame lands commitments from both cornerbacks, Morrison and Moore, are they going to stay in touch with backup cornerbacks in case of decommitment? Same at linebacker. I don't think so. I mean, that's hard to do. I think. Will they stay in touch? Probably. Will they stay in touch enough to where they can just swoop in and get a kid? Not the kids that are on the board now. That's not usually how it works because those kids are good enough prospects that they're going to commit to an Alabama, a Michigan, a Clemson, and Ohio State. And it's going to be a little harder to flip them from all but one of those schools. Michigan obviously be the one that you could probably have a better chance of flipping in. So I think it'd more be about go find a kid that maybe isn't on your radar right now if you do lose one of those guys. JoJo says that A.O. Manor kid sounds like a beast. He ran a 10.8 and set records in the 100 meters this spring at 6'3", 212 pounds. I know you're not feeling him. None of those things you said have anything to do with football. But here's the other thing about him. I've never said he was a bad player. I've never said he's a bad player. I've never said he stunk. What I said was he's exactly the type of guy that you already have a lot of. That's what I've said. I think he's a better player than Maureen Walker, they already have a commitment from. But again, 6'3", 212 pounds, fast straight line. Okay, Notre Dame's had a lot of those. Notre Dame had 2 of those guys in 2018, and they scored 3 points against Clemson. So, I mean, give me somebody besides a 6'3", 200-pound guy that's fast in a straight line, okay? That tells me he's going to be just as good as running post routes and go routes and comebacks as Deion Colsey, as Kevin Austin, as Tobias Merriweather, as CJ Williams. But that we've been there, right? Notre Dame had 2 6'4" guys in 2018 that ran 4.42s. I'm sorry. One ran a 4.42, one ran a 4.43. Both jumped over 40 inches at the combine. Notre Dame scored 3 points. And part of it was the quarterback, but the other part of it is they had nobody that could just take a quick throw and go make a play out of it. They didn't have anybody who could do that. And that's what this offense has been missing. And, he's not that guy. So, yeah, it's great that he ran a 10 whatever it is. I believe people have reported that Amorian Walker's ran faster than that too. Again, that's track. I don't care about that. What does he do on the football field? And what type of diversity does he bring to your receiving core, which is so much more important in today's era? And that's the problem. Again, you guys are taking some of this as like I'm saying, this kid stinks, this kid can't play. Nicholas Anderson's a good football player. I like Nicholas Anderson. Alex a good football player. He's got some skills. But they're all the same flipping guy. At some point in time, when you keep doing that and it's not working, you have to try something else. And that's the issue that it comes down to for me. Tommy Leonard, Vince is only getting half pay for today, right? Vince isn't getting paid for today. He's just sitting there in summer school. He's just flipping buttons. He's not getting paid for today. Are you kidding me? No, Vince is always going to get his cut. Don't worry. Vince is laughing too hard right now to find the next question. Liam Gaming says, whatever happened to the guy from UM who was kind of slow as a receiver but seemed a lot faster on the defensive side of the ball? I think he is from Tennessee. To my court, are you talking about Taylor Groves? He hasn't set a visit up with Notre Dame yet, so I don't know if there's a whole lot going on there. Haven't really heard much about him, so I don't know if he's. I feel like they have a better idea of where they stand with other receivers and a better fit there. So, I've said all along, I didn't see Notre Dame really making I didn't see them being a major factor for him, and I don't think that's going to change. Patrick McGrain, is Notre Dame downplaying how hard they're recruiting Bradshaw so the competition for him stays low? No, unfortunately, they're not. Because most of my vibes of they're not recruiting him hard are not coming from the staff. It's coming from his side of things. And so, no, I don't think. I wish, Patrick, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. I do, because he is, to me, a very, very important player in this class. George, are you going to be doing interviews with the visitors during or after the visits? We're going to try, but I don't really have much of a recruiting staff right now. So we're still in the process of trying to hire that. And we'll try to do some interviews, but a lot of it's going to be talking to sources and things like that. So. What have you heard about Nwankpa's Ohio State visit? He had a great visit, but the most important thing for me, he didn't commit. And that's all I cared about. Look, Ohio State was his leader going in, and Ohio State puts on a great recruiting operation. And that's not an insult. They put on a great show. And that's not an insult. That's not a criticism. That's part of the reason why they are what they are. The big thing for me was just don't commit. Don't commit. Don't commit. Now, when he visits, you have a puncher's chance. Ohio State was the leader going in. They're the leader coming out. They've, now it's just about Notre Dame's got to do it even better. Jay Wiki Jr., at what point do we panic on some of these guys if we haven't received a commitment yet? I don't think you should panic. I would say if 4 of these guys haven't committed by the end of June, then I would get a little nervous. You should never panic about it. I mean, just let it play out. But if we get to the end of June and they don't have at least 3 or 4 commitments from this group, then I'd be a little bit nervous. Brian Denbo, are there other recruits on campus not on your list? Not 2022 official visitors. These are all the official visitors are going to be on campus this weekend. We did talk a little bit about some of the 2020. It's okay, Vince, you pull that one up. There are some of the 2023 guys that that we've talked about. Who is the better prospect, Burnham, Sneed, or Tuihalamaka? So Burnham and Sneed are my two top linebackers, but they're different players. And so I don't necessarily who's better. They're different players. I think Burnham is a Mike Will. Sneed is a sort of a Rover, Sam, Will. They're different players. They're my top two linebackers. Tuihalamaka's third on that list of where I would rank the linebackers. Ronald says, just got home, wanted to holler before the chemo kicks in. Be well, everyone in the room. Go Irish. And Ronald, I know you've been battling this for a long time, my man, but keep fighting, keep plugging away. And a lot of people in Notre Dame Nation praying for you, buddy. Omar Austin says, Brian, we're on the same page. Wasn't Ricky Weeks the type of player where you get two of his cards in one pack of tops? Yes. Absolutely. D-Rock, great info and Q&A session. Remember to hit the like, subscribe, and notification bells. So, appreciate that. And then that is that's the end of our questions. So that is it for today's show. We will be talking to people, calling people, getting our sources. We'll be trying to figure out everything we can. Make sure you stay locked into irishbreakdown.com for all the latest on that. Plus, hopefully we'll get some resolution to whatever it is that Caleb Evans is going to be doing here very soon. So I hope everybody enjoyed the show. I hope everybody comes back for our next show, which will be tomorrow, a Friday mailbag. We actually had one question pop in here real quick, and that was from Ryan McCart. You got it, Vince? Okay, go ahead. Do you think Xavion Nwakpa is silently committed to Ohio State and told them that after the rest of his visits he could be committing to Ohio State? I have no evidence of that, Ryan, so I don't want to speculate. But honestly, I don't care, because to me, if you're silently committed but still taking other visits, there's a shot. And honestly, I don't think there's much of a difference between him being silently committed and where I think Ohio State stands for him anyway. I think Ohio State is the clear leader. I think that some other school is going to have to absolutely blow him away for them to get him. And I've said that for a while. I've never given you guys false hope that they're going to get Xavion Nwakpa. All I've ever said, and what I'll continue to say, is if he doesn't commit, and to me, what I mean by committing is he's not visiting anywhere else. I don't care much about silent commitments if you're still taking visits, because if you're still taking visits, there's a chance that somebody else could impress you. So to me, as long as he's still taking visits, Notre Dame has a puncher's chance. And I have enough confidence in this defensive staff to say, if you get a kid like that on campus, you never know. And that's kind of where I'm at with Xavion Nwakpa. So that is going to be it for today's show. So like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, sign up for our free daily newsletter, the merch store down below. You can get all of the Irish Breakdown gear down below. And I got some potentially good news on a message board yesterday. I don't want to talk about it too much until all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed and all those types of things. But I'm hoping, praying that we'll be getting that soon. So stay locked into that. So thanks for joining the show today. We'll be back with all of you again tomorrow for a Friday free-for-all mailbag. And hopefully the guy that's been putting up all the questions today, that's normally my co-host, is going to be feeling good enough tomorrow to be part of the show. I think secretly he was sitting out today's show because he wants to save his voice for tomorrow. That's what I really think is going on. So anyway, for Vince, who's right now laughing, but you can't see him on the screen, I'm Brian. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again very, very soon.